What's going on, guys? My name is Matt, and over the years I've owned a bunch of keyboards, from cheap membrane boards to mechanical keyboards of all shapes and sizes, and I've even upgraded some along the way, but I've yet to build a custom one, and that's what I'm doing today. Now, if you don't know, there's an entire subsection of the internet filled with nerds like me who are really into keyboards. This is an odd hobby, but I've fallen down the rabbit hole and don't see myself popping out anytime soon. Just like with a PC, you can buy a pre-built keyboard, as most people do, but for the same reasons you might build your own PC, you may also want to build your own keyboard. You get to hand select every component to fit your exact needs, preferences, and budget. One big caveat is this can get very expensive. The board I'm building in today's video comes in at a little over $200 all in, and believe it or not, that's considered to be on the budget end of things. With that being said, if you want the custom keyboard experience without the custom keyboard price, then picking up a cheap board and upgrading it can yield pretty awesome results. For example, here's a before and after from a $25 board that I upgraded with about $30 in parts. As you can see, upgrading a pre-built keyboard is a great option, and if you want to check that video out, I'll link it below, but in today's video we're going custom, and I'll hopefully be completing the board that I'll be using for the foreseeable future. Now, before I started to round up the parts, I needed to figure out what kind of board I wanted to build. In terms of the overall design, I wanted a smaller board but still wanted dedicated arrow keys. I wanted something that felt super solid, heavy, and ideally with a full metal build. In terms of switches, I'm starting to enjoy linear switches more, but my preference has always been tactile, so that's what I wanted to go for this. For keycaps, I wanted something minimal, but a set that still had some flashes of color. Finally, I wanted the typing experience to be relatively soft and for the board to sound slightly more muted than a lot of the keyboards people prefer the sound of. With all this in mind, I started to source parts. Luckily, AKKO offered to help out and provided a bunch of parts for this build, but I have no obligation to say anything positive about their products and will call out any problems if I find them. So with all that out of the way, let's go ahead and get into the parts that make up my new custom keyboard. Let's start out by talking about the kit I'm basing this build around, which is the AKKO Mod 005. This is a 65% mechanical keyboard kit that at the time of making this, you can get for $130 with free shipping on AKKO's website. This is a pretty darn good value, and I'll be showing you why right now. Inside of the box, we find everything is protected by thick foam, and under the foam we find an FR4 plate, which I'll talk about more in a second, some foam pieces, a quick start guide, a coiled cable, and the board itself. This is a fully aluminum gasket mounted kit that looks and feels super premium. The base kit itself weighs 927 grams, which is a little over 2 pounds. This is decently heavy and feels sturdy / solid in the hand. Before we get into the accessories, let's open this up and see how it's put together. On the bottom we find 8 hex screws holding the case together. I would have liked to see these either be Phillips screws or for AKKO to include an Allen wrench in the package, as not all people may have the tools necessary to open this. With the screws out and the board flipped back over, I was able to lift the top cover away, disconnect and remove the PCB/plate, take out the case foam, and was left with the bottom panel. The top and bottom panel are both made of CNC'd aluminum, and I couldn't find any major imperfections on them. Sure, an integrated brass weight would have been nice, but definitely not doable at this price point. Taking apart the PCB and plate, I was left with 3 pieces: the plate, the PCB, and some foam. The stock plate that comes pre-installed is an aluminum one, but what's kinda crazy is the fact AKKO also includes an FR4 plate in the box. This is awesome because it gives the end user multiple options, whereas normally buying an FR4 plate separate can cost around $30, so this is a great value add. The PCB is hot swappable, supports 5-pin sockets, and has north-facing LEDs. Now, north-facing sockets can cause the third row on cherry profile keycaps to sound different, so that's something to keep in mind. Sandwiched between the PCB and the plate is this plate foam, which is also nice to see included as it can improve acoustics on this keyboard by a bit. But this isn't the only included foam, and actually there is some thin and light foam that sits under the PCB, which again is great to see. In terms of switches to go into this board, I ended up going with the AKKO Ocean Blue switches. These are tactile switches, meaning they have a bump but no clicky noise the way something like a Cherry MX Blue would have. These have an end force of 36 grams and a tactile force of 45. These are considered some of, if not the best value per dollar tactile switches on the market. They come in at a little under $13 for a pack of 45 with free shipping. These are good for someone who likes something like a Cherry MX Brown but wants a more pronounced bump. I did lube these switches, but I'll talk more about that later in the video. For keycaps, AKKO sent out two different sets for me to show off. One is the black and gold set and the other is the midnight set, which will be discontinued soon, so if you like that set you may want to pick it up sooner rather than later. AKKO keycaps are all dual shot PBT with varying profiles depending on which set you get. These are both ASA profile, which is a bit different from the Cherry and OEM profiles I normally use, but were very easy to get used to. These sets come in at around $60 a piece, which is entering into the mid-range in terms of keycap pricing. These are very high quality, come packaged amazingly, and offer a ton of color options, but this is an area where you could save some money by just going for a more basic $30 set of PBT keycaps. With that being said, it all comes down to preference, and I like these sets a lot and can recommend them for someone looking in this price range. Beyond the kit, switches, and keycaps, I ended up using a fair amount of other materials to mod and customize this board. So once I had all the parts and materials in hand, I could start building and modding. The first order of business was to decide whether I wanted to go with the aluminum plate or the FR4 plate. I also wanted stock sound tests, so I built the board quickly with both to test them out. Here's a quick comparison between the aluminum and FR4 plates with the stock keyboard and stock Ocean Blue switches. After doing this, I found I liked the sound of the aluminum plate more, but the typing feel on the FR4 plate was much nicer in my opinion. It offered a softer typing feel, and the gasket mount allowed for a bit of bounce, which felt very nice to type on. Also, there are a ton of things I can do to affect the sound profile of the board, so I was more concerned with the typing feel. Now, these switches are pretty good stock, but I wanted to lube them to get the best experience possible. To lube a switch, you first have to open it up by lining it up on the tool, pressing down, and boom, the top should come right off. Then you can take off the stem, the spring, and are left with the bottom housing. I'm a noob at this stuff, so don't take this as a guide. I started with the bottom housing. I just grab a little bit of Krytox 205 grade 0 and apply some to one side, then the other, around this post, then inside it. For the stem, I take a similar amount and lube this side, then put some on the back, some on the front, but avoid the prongs to maintain tactility of the switch. For the spring, I just add them all into a bag with a few drops of super lube and shake them around to coat them. Then, in my tray, I just place the springs on the bottom housing, the stem on that, and then I quickly lube the top housing and pressed it into place. I had to do this 67 times, which is tedious but well worth it in my opinion. So with that done, I popped them into the board to test. So here's a sound test with the stock board and lubed Ocean Blue switches on the FR4 plate. I will also include the original sound for comparison. As you can hear, lubing the switches made a huge difference and the noise profile was not the only change. After lubing, these Ocean Blues felt much smoother. There did seem to be a slight loss of tactility, but nothing major. If you get these switches, they perform well unlubed, but I would recommend putting in the time to lube them. With that done, I could begin to do some mods that affect the acoustics of this board. It sounds a bit hollow stock in my opinion. Many people will do a silicone pour to dampen the sound, but that can cost upwards of $20 hours to do, and I found a much cheaper solution. I purchased a 3-pack of these silicone sheets for about $9 and only needed about 2/3 of one of them for this mod. I basically just cut up and layered pieces of the silicone into the bottom of the board, which should help dampen the noise a lot. Is this as good as a more traditional silicone pour? Probably not, but I think it gets you most of the way there for a fraction of the price. The next mod I did was add these switch pads to the PCB. This has a similar effect to the popular PE foam mod, but produces a slightly more muted sound that is less poppy and marbly. Applying these is super simple. You just pull them one at a time from the sheet and carefully place one wherever a switch will mount. This is also a bit tedious, but I think it's worth the effort. After this, I decided to do the Tempest Tape Mod, which is as simple as putting one or more layers of tape on the back of the PCB. This is thought to create a sort of high pass filter, and I do like the effect it creates, but only wanted it minimally, so I decided to go with a single layer of tape. This mod is super simple and cheap, so I would recommend anyone try it out, as you may like the effect it has. With that done, the final thing to focus on was the stabilizers. This board does support screw-in stabs, but I decided to just try out the stock ones because I can always upgrade in the future. The included ones are basic clip-in stabs. They're pretty mediocre in my opinion, but do come with a good amount of lube pre-applied. For these, I popped out the wire and took them apart. I added lube to the stem and housing, and then dipped each of the wire ends into dielectric grease. Then I just reassembled them in the reverse order. Before I reinstalled them, I got out some cloth band-aids to do the band-aid mod. Basically, I just cut and applied small strips to where the stabilizers mount to remove any play or rattling in the connection. Then I took slightly larger pieces and added them to where these stabilizers will bottom out. Also, you may notice I didn't clip the stabilizers. That's because they're already flat. With that all done, I was finally ready to put it all together. I start by laying out the PCB, putting the foam on top and the plate on top of that. I could then start pressing in each of the 67 switches, making sure to take my time as not to bend any of them. I removed and installed these switches probably upwards of 10 times for this video, and luckily only bent 2 pins the entire time, which were easy to bend back into place. With the PCB plate and switches ready, I grabbed out the bottom of the shell and began layering in my silicone sheets. Then I brought the PCB back over and carefully plugged it in, then rested it into the case. The top panel was placed on. I flipped it over and installed only 7 screws because I accidentally lost one of them, but this seemed to work out fine. The last piece of the puzzle was to install all the keycaps, which as you can see, I did all the testing with the midnight keycaps, but have peppered in some shots of the black and gold, as well as we'll show you more in a minute. With it all put together, here is a final sound test and comparison. As you can hear, this board sounds very deep and thocky. I like the way it looks, sounds, and performs. My one area of slight disappointment is with the stabilizers. They're not rattly or anything, but many of the keys with these sound much more muted and don't have any thock. Again, I can always upgrade these in the future if I so choose. One other thing to talk about is the RGB. I use solid keycaps, so it wasn't important at all to me, but the RGB does get bright, has a good number of options, and bounces off very nicely on the white FR4 plate. All in all, I'm really happy with how this keyboard came out, especially for being my first custom board. The overall look and feel was exactly what I was hoping for, and the sound is really nice, but I may play around with changing or switching out some acoustic mods. All these AKKO products used were really great in my opinion, and they'll all be linked in the description below. The Mod 005 kit and switches are very easy to recommend, but if you're looking to save money on the overall build, going with a cheaper keycap set might not be a bad idea. With that being said, I do think think these keycaps are amazing in both quality, looks, and even packaging / presentation. Let me know what you guys think of the midnight caps versus the black and gold ones. I think they both look nice, but I'm having trouble deciding between the two. So yeah guys, I think this wraps this video up. I hope you guys enjoyed it. If you did, make sure to give it a thumbs up and consider subscribing. And as always, this is Matt from Tech by Matt, signing out.